The last two seasons the Eagles finished 3-0 was in 2004 and 2016. So they can either go on a great Super Bowl run or finish in last place in the NFC East. I could see it going either way, honestly. You're watching Sports Talk Philadelphia. Welcome back. I'm Aidan, as always, the host of this show, and we've got Siobhan back for another week. Siobhan, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you, Aidan?
Doing very well. And Mike, we're glad to have you back. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Eagles are 3-0. What more can you ask for?
Yeah, no, they are 3-0. We're going to jump right into them because, wow, this was an amazing game. First of all, Jalen Hurts played probably the best game of his entire career, 22 of 35, 340 passing yards, 3 passing Ds. A.J. Brown also had a great game, 5 receptions for 85 yards and a touchdown. But the guy that also really stood out outside of Hurts had to be Devontae Smith, 8 receptions for 169 yards and a receiving touchdown, all career highs for Devontae. And we're going to jump right into the guy who was the best player in the NFC. He's the star quarterback for the Eagles. What is the feeling for Jalen Hurts, and how high do you think his ceiling is this season?
I mean, Nick Sirianni said it best. It was a big-time performance on a big-time stage. He was named, Jalen Hurts was named NFC Offensive Player of the Month. And, you know, the playing and the game speaks for itself. The Vikings are not an easy team to play against, but Jalen Hurts, like you said, had the game of his life against them.
Yeah, I mean, for a third straight game, he played great. And I think all of last year, what we wanted to see was an improvement in his passing ability. And, I mean, he threw for 330 passing yards on Sunday. So, obviously, he took that leap that we wanted him to take. And this is his third career game with 330 passing yards and 50 rushing yards. And that's only third behind Russell Wilson and Steve Young for the only players to do that. So, in my opinion, he's the clear MVP through 3 weeks, and he's just been amazing.
You know, he has been really, really good. As you said, Mike, much improved passer from what he was last year. Devontae Smith also really stepped up, especially after having no catches in week 1 to now leading the team in receptions in week 3. Where do you see Smith's role on the team? Do you see A.J. Brown as the wide receiver 1, or does it not really matter for this team?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's coming into his own. I mean, I wouldn't say he was a little probably like disappointed that he let A.J. Brown get the spotlight, but I think he knew. I mean, it's his second year, and you know, this is the game that he kind of needed to kind of show that he's still the number 10 overall pick, and he's still that Heisman winner. So, I mean, I think this duo is probably the best behind Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle right now, and they can only get better. So, I'm happy what he did on Sunday, and I just love the duo with him and Brown.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that this is a great duo between the two of them. Hopefully it becomes much stronger, but I don't really have any complaints about the offense. And I also don't have any complaints about the defense either. Also, I'm going to TM this. I think that Philadelphia should be named to Sacks of Philadelphia no, that's not right. Whatever. The defense was absolutely amazing. 9 sacks against Washington. Sacked Carson Wentz, who was the former quarterback. Brandon Graham, 2.5 sacks, 1 forced fumble. Hassan Reddick, 1.5 sacks, a forced fumble. Wentz fumbled twice. He lost a fumble. Really just never got in good shape because of the defense. How impressive was the defensive line in this game?
I think against the Commanders, to correct my earlier mistakes, I said the Vikings, but, you know, with Kirk Cousins, with Justin Jefferson being kept quiet with that defense, Carson Wentz as well, it really shows the quality of the Eagles' defense, and even though it's still early in the season, you can't ever overstate the importance of having defense, especially in this Eagles team, like you said, you know, 3-0, it could mean that they could go to the Super Bowl, it could mean that they finish last in the division, so the fact that they're showing this much quality against teams that are notoriously good, that's just a really promising sign for them.
Yeah, I mean, what happened to Carson Wentz, man? I mean, he got sacked 9 times. I know not all those are his fault, but probably half of those were the same problems he had when he was in Philly, just holding onto the ball way too long and just letting himself get sacked. I mean, I know when your O-line's not good, it's hard to escape sometimes, but it's the same thing that we saw when he was here. I mean, just holding onto the ball and just not being smart, and it benefited the Eagles on Sunday. And Fletcher Cox, I think, finally woke up. Brandon Graham was vintage. So I do like what I saw, and D-line was kind of an issue the past couple weeks. I'm glad they kind of show that they still got it.
So Carson Wentz was definitely a huge problem for the Commanders and a big reason why their Eagles defense was so successful. Do you think that this was more the Eagles defense actually being good, or was it that they played a really bad O-line and the quarterback just has inconsistencies dealing with pressure?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think they did play good just because I don't think it was a fluke, because last week they did the same. They played great against the Vikings with obviously a much better offense. I don't know how much better quarterback Kirk Cousins is than Wentz, but I mean, they show that they can do that against a good offense. So I know the Commanders' offense isn't great, and we know what Carson is, but I still think they played pretty well.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. As you look into the NFC standings, it's now gotten a lot more crazy after all the teams in the division played each other this week. The Eagles are 3-0. I think most people figured that they would win the NFC East. And then you look at who's second and third. You got the Giants and Cowboys at both 2-1, and then you got the Commanders at 1-2. I really thought the Commanders were the second strongest team. They haven't looked like that after week one. You now got the Giants, who were started out 2-0, are now 2-1. The Cowboys are still without Dak at 2-1. What's everyone's feelings on this division behind the Eagles?
I mean, you'd never want to say that they're running away with the division already, but I mean, they're 3-0. You really can't do any better than that, and they're showing really great performances as well. So the fact that they're showing a lot of quality, they're improving game after game. You know, any mistake they make in one game, they kind of fix in the next one. So I think right now it's really just, it's all Eagles, and obviously good teams, they can catch up. We have to see how it goes, but I think right now the Eagles are kind of running away with things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Monday night game kind of proved that too. I mean, I think the Cowboys are probably your biggest threat, but they don't have Dak right now. But I think they are getting him probably back soon. I'm not sure exactly when, but I think once they get him back, I think they'll be the biggest threat. But right now, it's the Eagles' division to lose for sure.
Yeah. As you get farther into the season, you get off to that great start. How important is it to be 3-0 very early on?
I mean, it's the best you can ask for, especially this early in the season, especially when the Eagles haven't been the most consistent team in previous seasons. You know, everyone's searching for that second Super Bowl. So the fact that they're coming out so well and they're just putting on these big performances and players are having really great individual performances, again, it's the best you can ask for, especially after the Eagles have been less than satisfactory before.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and also I think, you said in the opening how they started 3-0 in 2016, and we know how that turned out. I mean, you never know. I mean, it's early in the season, but it's definitely a good sign that, especially with everybody who's wearing that they didn't play their starters in the preseason, it's definitely a good sign that they're starting off this well.
Yeah. So the Eagles played a familiar face last week in Carson Wentz. They'll be facing another familiar guy, this time with Jacksonville. Former head coach Doug Peterson and the Jacksonville Jaguars are traveling to Philly, play at 1 o'clock. The Jaguars are coming off a huge win against the Los Angeles Chargers, won 38-10, the game that most people expected the Chargers to win. How is everyone feeling about this game, especially after what Jacksonville just did to what was considered one of the strongest teams in the AFC?
I think it's a winnable game for the Eagles. They do have some injuries in Derek Barnett, Andre Dillard, Slay and Dickerson didn't participate in their most recent practices, but they've had non-injury days off, so that's not reason to panic yet. But Darius Slay had a good comment when he was asked about why everyone wears the Batman cape and everyone's a different type of Batman. And he said it's because there's no Robins, they've got no sidekicks. So I think that mentality and that confidence going into a game against the Jaguars, who have a great coach in Doug Peterson, and like you said, came off of a huge win, I'm pretty optimistic going into that game.
Yeah, I mean, the Jags are in much better position than they were last year under Peterson than they were with Urban Meyer last year. I mean, that was horrible last year, and they definitely, they have a good team. I wouldn't label them contenders or anything on that level yet, but they're a good team. But I think the Eagles should have no problem. And if Doug Peterson better not hear one boo from the Philly fans. I mean, he better get cheered, and I think he will, hopefully. But it wasn't right. I know it kind of ended badly, but he did win us the Super Bowl, and it wasn't all his fault. So I hope he does get cheered. But they are a good team, but I don't think the Eagles should have any problem with them.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree, especially with Eagles fans not booing Doug. I think that would be totally disgraceful. Quickly before we wrap up the Eagles, do you guys have score predictions or predict who's going to win this game?
Yeah, I think they'll win. I'll say 27-17.
Yeah, I think it won't be as big of a win as with the Commanders. It'll be a lot closer, but definitely a win for the Eagles.
I'll go 30-17 Eagles. I think that they'll have a strong offensive game. I think the defense will let up a little bit more after these 2 strong weeks, but I feel very confident in shutting down Jacksonville, especially because Jacksonville has played a couple teams that have been really banged up defensively, and that's, I think, one of the biggest reasons why they've done so well. We're now going to go into a more disappointing Philadelphia team. The Phillies, who got off to a very strong start in the season, really needed to play well against the Braves this past weekend. They started off strong, won the first game 1-0, won the second one 9-0, and then lost the last two, have lost the last two to the Cubs. So they've lost 4 straight. They're very close to not making the playoffs anymore. What is your opinion about how this series played out over the weekend?
There is no offense. They didn't give Aaron Nola or Zach Wheeler any run support. The big players are not showing up. The bats are completely quiet. Like, I know defense wins you titles, but the offense really has to get going because it's do or die now for the Phillies. They can't keep hoping that other teams lose so that they can kind of squeak into the playoffs. They really need to have that fire under them, and it's still kind of theirs to lose in the playoff run, but I really think that it's kind of panic time for them because they're just not putting up the performances that they need to if they actually want to play in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, with trying to stay as calm as possible, it's so frustrating, and it's the same thing every year. But it did seem different this September. I mean, they started this September off a little better, and obviously, I mean, they were 20 games up over 500 at one point, and everything was going good. Rob Thompson, I thought he's the guy, but if they don't make the playoffs, there's no way you can bring him back. I mean, I know the past few years have been a bad collapse, but if they don't make the playoffs with being, what were they, 5 games up a week ago, and now who knows with what's going on now, but who knows what it'll be like after today. But yeah, I mean, if they don't get to this playoffs, it'll be a joke.
Yeah, Siobhan, you brought up that the hitting has been well. The pitching's actually been pretty solid. That's got to be feeling at least a little bit good. But just as a pitcher, how do you think these guys are feeling that you're pitching as well as you possibly can and just getting absolutely no run support?
It's a historic problem with the Phillies. Even with some of our best pitchers in recent decades, they haven't gotten any run support. So, you can pitch the game of your life. You can do whatever you can do on the mound, but if the bats aren't there to back it up, then I don't want to say it's kind of futile because obviously we want our pitchers to put on good performances every day, but when your bats aren't backing it up, it's kind of like, well, then what's the point?
Yeah, I don't think Thompson's been very good with how he's using the pitchers the past week. I mean, with the bullpen, even last night, he's not using guys like Dominguez, but he's using like Nick Nelson. You got a week left in the season. You're almost to the playoffs. You got to use everybody you got. And I know they kind of pushed the envelope with having Nola on 4 days rest and didn't really work out too well. But you got to just go all in. I mean, you got 5 games left, and this will be the first time you can make the playoffs since 2011. You got to just go all in and see what happens.
Yeah, so there wasn't a whole lot of bright spots this past week, but there was one, and that was Matt Vierling, who had an amazing game Wednesday night, went 5 for 5, hit the winning walk-off single against the Blue Jays. The next night drove in the only run of the game against the Braves. He's now batting .244 on the season with 5 home runs and 29 RBIs. How important has it been for the Phillies, especially these 2 games, which could now potentially be deciders, for someone as young as Matt Vierling to really step up in these big situations and come in clutch for them?
It's definitely promising that someone so young can do it, but I don't think it should fall squarely on his shoulders when you have guys like Bryce Harper, Rhys Hoskins, Nick Castellanos. When you have that experience and you have guys who are supposed to be the big names, who are supposed to be in this position where they're the ones getting the offense, to have a young guy do it, it's great, but it also is going to put, I think, a ton of pressure on Vierling so that if he doesn't perform, people are going to blame him solely when it's part of a much bigger problem and, he's only doing so much as one player.
These young guys, I don't know where the Phillies would be because, I mean, guys like Nick Maton, Vierling, I mean, they've kind of, I wouldn't say saved the season, but they've picked up these veterans who have struggled. I mean, guys like Derek Hall, which I don't know why he's still not up here yet, but, they've picked them up, and I'm not saying they're the reason why they're 12 games over 500, but they're definitely the reason why they've had some success.
Yeah, so when you look at all these young guys the Phillies have, like you said, Mike, that's been a big reason for their success. Who has been the person out of these young guys that's really stepped up, in your opinion, to get the Phillies where they are, at least potentially into a playoff spot?
Derek, even though he hasn't been up, it's Derek Hall. I mean, what he did when he was up here was phenomenal. And I know it's kind of hard. You have to have Harper DHing, and you have Hoskins at first, but he should be up here because he just gives that power. I mean, he's got insane power, and he was doing so good when he was up here. So I think it's been Derek Hall for me this year.
Yeah, no, I would also add in Bryson Stott, who we didn't mention, was also been a huge key piece, was really struggling early in the season. Once Rob Thompson came in, really stepped up, has been the clear potential future shortstop for the Phillies. We're going to go now to the standings, and they definitely are not where the Phillies want to be. They are currently 2.5 games beyond the Padres for the second spot, only a half a game up on the Brewers in the third spot. Do the Phillies, I'm almost scared to ask because I know the answer, I don't really know. Do you guys think the Phillies can make the playoffs, especially the way they're playing right now?
I'm going to have to say I don't think at this point they have a very good chance. I don't think it's impossible. Obviously, anything can happen still, but they're more relying on other people to mess up. And that's not what the mentality should be. That's not how it should be. When Rob Thompson was asked about what they can do better, he gave very generic answers to just kind of, I don't want to say dodge the question, but kind of dodge the question. So I think if they keep performing like they have been, I don't see a playoff run happening this year.
Yeah, you're not making the playoffs when you leave 15 runners on base against the Cubs. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And I think they scored 1 run in the first game, none last night, and then I don't think they're scoring any today. I mean, it's at this point they don't really deserve it. I mean, but obviously I want them to get in. But if they play like this for last week and they just sneak in, I mean, what do we have to cheer for? I mean, to get swept in the first. Like I want them to make the playoffs, but if they just back in like they're doing, I don't want them to get in like that.
No, I totally agree with that, and that's the sentiment of a lot of Philly fans. Let's say hypothetically they do make the playoffs. At this point, they'd either be playing the Cardinals or Mets, who are fighting for that third and second spot right now. Which team would you rather play between those two?
I mean, I think I'd go for the Mets, but either team is going to embarrass the Phillies if they do play them. Like Mike said, I think they would get swept in the first series, so I mean, neither team is ideal, but I guess I'll just go for the Mets. Good rivalry. That's all it makes for good baseball.
Yeah, probably in a 3-game series, I would say the Cardinals, just because the Mets, you got DeGrom and Scherzer. I mean, I know we got Wheeler and Nola, but those are 2 of the all-time greats in the sport, and those are probably 2 not guarantee losses, but there's 2 hard games. So I think I'd rather face the Cardinals with 40-year-old Adam Wainwright, even though I know they're good, but I think I'd rather face the Cardinals.
Either way, it's not looking so good for the Phillies. We're now going to jump to a team that just started their preseason in the Flyers. They've had 3 games so far in the past week. They won the first one against the Bruins 2-1, and then lost against the Sabres in the next 2 games 2-1, and then the Capitals 3-1. Been a bit disappointing for the Flyers to start off the preseason, although there wasn't a whole lot of expectations going into the season for them. What is the biggest takeaway from the preseason in these first 3 games at least?
They're definitely utilizing the young players, which I think is sort of a positive. Obviously, they're not going to light the world on fire, but Felix Antrim has been a positive. We definitely need some fortification in that goalie spot behind Carter Hart. So some kind of bright spots, but overall it has been disappointing, which I hate to say we kind of expected, but they've proven why we didn't have very big expectations going into preseason.
Yeah, the offense definitely struggled just like last year, and then I agree. I think Sandstrom, he looks solid, and I think he'll probably be the backup behind Hart. But yeah, like you said, Siobhan, no firepower, and without Couturier, you can't really do much. I'm hoping they can get him back. I don't really know. The reports are kind of all over the place, so we don't really know exactly when he's coming back, but they need him if they want to do anything this year.
Yeah, so I was going to mention Couturier as well, because that is a really big concern for the Flyers. It does, like you said, Mike, it seems like that there's reports he will be back a lot sooner than they were hoping, which is good, but especially with back injury, you just don't know, and especially for veteran players. And that's sort of the other thing, too, for the Flyers. When you have a lot of injuries, especially like they had last year, that's got to be a huge concern for them going into the season. And is there really anyone that can step up if more of these veterans get hurt?
I don't know if anyone can really take Couturier's spot, but it's a very sharp drop-off in the team. You have these 30-plus-year-old veterans, and then you have these 18, 19-year-olds on the team. So I would say maybe your Kevin Hayes, your Ivan Provorovs. But other than that, I don't see who could take Couturier's place in terms of leadership, which I think is what the Flyers need right now, no matter how much they don't want to name an official captain. They need someone to be the head of the team, and I think Couturier is the best person to do that, and I don't see anyone being able to fill his skates, so to speak.
Yeah, the one guy that was really good, you both mentioned him, Felix Antrim was just amazing, especially in the first game against the Bruins. Stopped all 17 shots he faced against them. He's currently fighting for the backup spot. It looks like a losing battle for him, or at least uphill. But how impressive it been for him to get this really big shot and has really stepped up under at least the limited lights that you can get in the preseason.
I think it's very positive, especially since Carter Hart recently has struggled. He wasn't matching his performances that he did in his first season. So it's good that we have solid backup options in case Hart's game really goes down the toilet. But again, we need that fortification in goalie as well, because right now it's just kind of Carter Hart, and he hasn't been the most reliable or the most promising or what he could be. So I definitely think Sandstrom, while it's an uphill battle, I think it's one that he's up for.
Yeah, and then when you go with the Flyers, another big concern for them, going off of the Carter Hart, well, a lot of the reasons why a lot of people, especially me, thinks that he struggles is because of the defense. That just doesn't feel like they did anything to add these defensive pieces. Is there any hope that the defense could help Carter Hart if he starts to struggle the way that he has? Or is Carter Hart just going to have to basically go back to what he did in the 2020 season, do everything to keep the Flyers in a postseason contention, or at least not last in the Metropolitan Division?
I think it's all going to fall on him, because I know Ivan Provorov and Tony DeAngelo, that partnership is not going to be the permanent end-all be-all, but they just looked okay against the Capitals. And you know, when you have a goalie in Carter Hart he's not the young guy he was in 2020, but he's still pretty young, and he should have, with the defense, that experience, he should have a more secure and just, you know, more faith in the guys that are supposed to be protecting him. But I feel like all the defense is ultimately going to come back on him, and it's going to make him seem probably a lot worse and a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? Just a lot more not as reliable as we know he is. But when it all falls on your shoulders, it's kind of hard to really make that happen and really show that.
So before we wrap up this segment, either of you have any hope that the Flyers won't finish in last in the Metropolitan?
Really. I think there's going to be bright spots. I think we're going to see some players come up that, you know, are young and maybe make a good difference and are ones for the future, but I don't think it's going to be enough to help us finish anywhere above last place.
Yeah, I think at least having Tortorella, I think that kind of saves us at least from last place. I think they'll be a little competitive, but not anywhere close to a playoff berth. But
Yeah,
I'm hoping that they're at least a little fun to watch.
Yeah, I think the biggest hope is that maybe the Devils or Islanders still struggle the way they did last year, and then we won't finish. It's more we rely on other teams to be worse than us rather than us playing better than that. So that wraps up the Flyers. We're now going to go into our last segment of the show, Fast Five, and we're going to start with a segment that we're going to bring back for the first time this year, talking baseball, this time with Mike.
All right, we're going to start off the big story, well, one of the big stories in baseball. Albert Pujols last week hitting 700 home runs, fourth all-time, behind Barry Bonds, who had 762, Hank Aaron, who had 755, and Babe Ruth, who had 714. And him and Hank Aaron are the only players with 3,000 hits and 700 home runs. So it's just remarkable that we could even, to be in the same class as Babe Ruth or Hank Aaron, and Barry Bonds, well, I don't, but I mean, just to be in the same list as those two, I mean, it's unbelievable, and it's great that we have a chance to watch that. And I'm hoping that he, not against the Phillies, but I hope that we can kind of see him one last run with the Cardinals, because he's one of my favorite players. So it's cool that we're seeing this one last time.
Yeah, and it's especially cool they got to do it with the Cardinals, coming back for the Angels this year for one last ride. We're going to go to another segment, talking soccer with Siobhan.
So not a lot of union news, but there is U.S. national team news. I'm going to start generating the World Cup hype now, even though I don't think the U.S. will do very well, because Greg Berhalter, his system doesn't make any sense. They lost 2-0 against Japan, did not register a shot on goal. They tied against Saudi Arabia 0-0. This is not the kind of team that should be doing this, especially against the teams that they played. And on a big stage like the World Cup, where a lot of these guys are going to be in their first World Cup and where we've had the most young talent that we've had in decades, I don't think Berhalter's the guy that's going to, get them far. And I don't think that he's going to be sacked right before the World Cup, but I think with his judgment and decision-making and the fact that he blames losses on things like lack of personality, that's not a good coach in my opinion. And I never thought I'd be longing for the days of Jurgen Klinsmann or Bob Bradley, but I really am now. And I just think that Berhalter should have never been given the job permanently. I hope maybe they can get lucky in the group stages, but I don't really see them making it out of the group stages very strongly.
All right, Mike, we're going to go back to another question to you. We're now 3 weeks into the NFL season. Do you have a front runner for MVP?
Yeah, I mean, a little biased, but I'll probably go Hurts. I mean, just what I've seen, but we've seen it the past few years. I mean, obviously those quarterbacks who can pass and run have a good chance of winning MVP. I mean, Lamar Jackson. So, if he continues this for the next 12, 13 games, I think he has a clear shot of he can easily win it if they keep doing this, and their schedule is favorable for that. You know, they have a pretty easy schedule. So I think right now he's probably my early favorite, but we'll see as the season, continues on.
At this point, I'm definitely going to agree with you on that one. Not being any bias at all.
Yeah.
Siobhan, we're going to go back to you for this question. NHL has started their preseason. Do you have any early favorites for the Stanley Cup?
I think this season it's going to be a close race between the Avalanche and the Hurricanes. I think the Avs will go back-to-back, but the Hurricanes will definitely give them some problems. So I think it'll be Avs, but I also wouldn't be surprised if the Canes were the one with Lord Stanley's Cup this season.
And I agree with that. I'm also surprised you didn't mention the Lightning, who have been in multiple NHL Stanley Cups. So are you expecting a little bit of a fallback from them?
I think there is going to be a little bit. I just don't know how consistent they're going to be that many seasons in a row. And frankly, I still don't really understand Southern hockey. Maybe that's just me being Northern. But obviously the Lightning, I think, are going to be good during the season. But I don't know how strong they're going to be making another push for another Stanley Cup. But of course, it wouldn't be very surprising if they do, and I think it'd be a really great feat and really good for Southern franchises if they do. So they're definitely in there. Definitely too soon to tell in preseason, but I think Avs, Canes, maybe Lightning, just a lot of weather happening, a lot of weather phenomenon competing for the Cup this season.
So the last question I'm going to take, who's the AL MVP for baseball, Aaron Judge or Ohtani? I'm going to go with Aaron Judge on this one, but I definitely am a little bit peeved at baseball fans who are kind of just really don't like Ohtani for the simple reason that he is so good that everyone's talking about him. When you have a guy, for the first time ever, who's gotten over 10 wins and over 30 home runs in the same season for being a pitcher and hitter, is absolutely incredible what Ohtani is doing. But at the same point, what Judge has done is just also amazing, hitting 61 home runs. Right now, he's tied for the American League record for home runs this season. He's also going for the Triple Crown, which has never been done. So we're watching two guys who are doing something that we have never seen before. I think that baseball fans are doing too much arguing about who should be MVP instead of actually accepting how great this season has been for this race. I'm just going to throw it out there quickly. Do you guys agree with Judge? Do you think Ohtani should be it, or?
Yeah, I think Ohtani's season shouldn't be glossed over, but if you're just comparing the two, I mean, it's Judge, but you're right. I mean, people should be accepting that what Ohtani's doing is, we haven't seen in,
ever.
Yeah,
it's literally, no, because people are comparing him to Babe Ruth, but it's literally, we've never seen this happen. Well, that wraps up Sports Talk Philadelphia. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to follow us on our social medias on Twitter and Instagram at Sports Talk LTV. We hope that you reply, follow us there, look at all the content we're putting out, and also make sure to tune in next week. Thank you so much.